Hello, friends, and welcome into Rates and Barrels. It's a mid-March edition. I am Chris Welsh, and there is no Eno. There's no DVR. Is it even Rates and Barrels? I know some of you are having a big panic attack. I will try to hold down the fort. And joining me today, we've got James Anderson from RotoWire, one of my great friends, one of the best prospect minds out there, as we are going to be talking about first-year player drafts, and we'll get to James here in just 1 second. I do want to remind you guys that the 2023 Fantasy Baseball Draft Kit is here. Just go to the athletic.com/rates and barrels. $2 a month. You'll be rocking. Why not? Get all the great stuff. You can get all Eno's great work, the kit. Got my Dynasty ranks. Check it out. Athletic.com/rates and barrels. You can find my dear friend James Anderson on Twitter at RealJRAnderson. James, what's up, buddy?
Oh, man. So much going on this time of year, dude, but happy to be here with you.
You know, I'm kind of curious about this. I was talking with Eno. Me and Eno were kind of planning this first-year player conversation. And do you think it's too late to have it? I actually think we're in a really interesting time. And the reason I ask this is like you and I doing, you do the RotoWire prospect stuff. I have prospect one. We're talking about first-year player in like November. We're talking about it in December. January seems to be like the really big, hot first-year player spot, but we're doing this in early March. There's still dynasty drafts that are going to start, but we've also kind of got a little bit more information. We've got players that are out at camps now. We've got guys that might even be running into games. I mean, we are getting more first-year player stuff. Do you think it's too late to really get into first-year player in March, or do you think it actually might be a little secret weapon if you do your first-year player or your fresh new startup dynasties in like late March?
Obviously you're going to get a larger percentage of dynasty leagues to be able to use your content if you're doing it earlier than later. If you're doing it mid to late January, then that should pretty much cover every dynasty league. But I play in several where we haven't started our first year player drafts yet. I think you probably would want to do it that way. I guess if you had to pick whether to do it early or do it late, I think doing it as close to the season as you can makes sense. So hopefully that encompasses a decent amount of leagues.
Yeah, I mean, that's how I feel about it too. Like getting an advantage of waiting and seeing. Prime example was I chatted with Druw Jones just recently. I mentioned it here and everywhere else that I got to chat with Druw Jones, and I felt like in like November, March, even though Druw Jones had kind of been the consensus number one first year player guy, there was starting to lead up to the Jackson. Not to say that Jackson Holliday isn't worthy, but like he was starting to slowly kind of like close the gap. And then you started seeing him in camps, and we're seeing him on the backfields and video, and he's physically growing. And we just have so much more information of what's going on with Jackson Holliday that I felt like even though people were kind of jumping to Druw Jones, as November and December started to roll on, that started to slide a little bit and started to change a little bit. And the information when I chatted with Druw was he was a full go. And I felt like part of that change was like, well, Druw hasn't been in any games, and we're seeing this progression of Jackson Holliday. Well, now as I talk with Druw, he's like, yeah, I feel good. I'm good. I've talked with Lawler, talked with Carroll about the shoulder injury stuff. I'm going to be in practices. I'm going to be in game action, minor league spring training, and that's going to get him to an affiliate. I feel like that actually works a little bit more back into his favor of feeling comfortable about that. I don't know if it necessarily changes him being one or two or whatever it is, but that's one of those reasons, like getting information about players as much as possible on first year players, what we're looking for. Has there been any swaying with you on the top two guys? And that's what we're going to talk about here. We're going to do tiers of players, and really tier one is just Druw Jones and Jackson Holliday. Has there been any swaying in this entire process for you?
No, I had it 1A, 1B pretty much all off season, and sticking with that. I think it's anyone who wants to put Holliday over Jones, I think it's more about Holliday than any slight on Jones. Holliday's just been trending up like a rocket ship over the past year, and Jones has been, Jones is more sort of the track record guy, but I think track record's kind of overrated on the amateur side. It's kind of like, what have you done recently? Because all these guys are very early in their development and very early in their physical maturation. So I definitely get the case for Holliday. I definitely get the case for Jones, and I have Jones one spot ahead of Holliday, but I think it's definitely those two in the top tier for me.
So, okay, so let's do this for a second. I'm going to attempt to encompass as much as possible, not only talking about first year player, but surrounding these guys with, if you guys were doing a prospect draft, or, if you're looking at prospects versus dynasty, you guys can get James's prospect ranks over at RotoWire. If you would like to check it out, you can sub there and you can check it out. There's a really interesting name that is sandwiched between these two guys. You have these guys both inside the top 12, and sandwiched in between Druw Jones and Jackson Holliday is James Wood. And James Wood has been getting even more pub for some absurd sprint speeds and times he's put up that would rival Corbin Carroll, except he's 6'7", 230, 240 pounds. I've always had a tenuous relationship with James Wood, because every time I see him in person, which has been a lot, he stinks. But at the same time, it's at complex level, and I think he plays up, and then he goes and he, puts up amazing numbers as soon as he gets out of a rehab here in complex and goes up to the next level. But what can't be denied is he looks like the number one prospect in the Nationals from that trade. How do you parse out James Wood being behind Druw Jones and above Jackson Holliday in that sandwich? Do you think that's slowly starting to maybe change, especially when you're talking about the what have you done for me lately?
I think it'll just be that same order for me on the next update. I kind of lump those three together because I think they are the three best prospects that don't have any upper level experience under their belt. So obviously Woods played at higher levels or has more experience at higher levels, A ball basically than Holliday, and obviously more than Jones. But I think those guys are all kind of moving on a similar trajectory towards the majors. I wouldn't be surprised if they all debut the same year. And I think they all have just massive ceilings. So all the guys I have ahead of them, I expect to beat them to the majors by at least a full year. And so these three are kind of the elite guys that you won't see anytime soon.
Well, that's kind of telling if you think that Holliday and Druw Jones would come up at the same time as James Wood. That would also probably show that they are jumping and skipping levels. I mean, James is probably going to be at high A to start and maybe push double A. I'm expecting both Holliday and Druw Jones to be at low A this year and maybe move to high A. But do you think there's at some point like that's going to change and Druw Jones and Jackson Holliday are going to even just move forward, even maybe at the same level of where James Wood is?
Yeah, I think Jones and Holliday are the types of guys that are going to move very quickly by prep hitter standards. And then I also think if you look at team context, the Nationals are further behind the Diamondbacks and the Orioles in terms of when they're going to start contending. So I don't really see any reason why the Nationals would bring James Wood up any sooner than they need to, because they're going to be really bad for the next at least 3 years. So you could see a scenario where Holliday is kind of the final piece to the puzzle for the Orioles, or Jones is kind of, they're ready to kind of push for a wild card spot and they break camp with Jones in center field or something like that. So team context factors in the fact that Wood is this ridiculously tall specimen. Those guys typically don't move super, super fast. There can be exceptions, but yeah, I think factoring everything in, the fact Jones and Holliday, really, really strong two-way guys in terms of, adding value with the glove. I think they're all going to move to the majors at around the same time.
What would it take for Holliday to jump Druw Jones in your mind? Would it take early production changes? I mean, what's the move and what's the date, the deadline? You'd say Druw Jones struggles, Jackson Holliday is good, and it is May 15th, and these have to swap. What does it take?
It would probably have to take something Jones did or didn't do to kind of have some doubt creep into my mind regarding him. I think Holliday has a higher floor than Jones. So
maybe like higher strikeout rate for Druw. Like Drew's strikeout rate is pushing like the really high 20s, and Holliday's sitting in the low 20s and not producing.
I think it's more of just a question mark with Jones. I would be stunned if Holliday ever really had any issues with the hit tool. And with Jones, I think he'll be great, but we just don't really know. So it would be Jones being worse than I expected him to be and then Holliday being as good as I expect them to be, I could see that flipping because they are in the same tier for me.
In Dynasty, what do you say to people that are going to look at like 18-year-old, 19-year-old kids that don't have a lot of professional experience and are going to invest as far as Dynasty goes? The Otno, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, me and Eno kept going back and forth about that. The podcaster league that I did end up getting Druw Jones for like $2. And because I smartly figured out quick that I need to go $2 because someone will inevitably push $1 more just to be a jerk. And I had to go and get Druw Jones. And I made that investment in a format that, I don't know, it definitely reeked more of needing more proximity type of players. So like, how do you deal with, I mean, you are, and I'm, by the way, I'm not against it because, you know, I'm the exact same way on this, but like you've got 2 barely professional players inside the top 15 overall prospects. Like, what do Dynasty players do with that? Are you comfortable? Should they be comfortable taking these players inside the top 125, 150 of Dynasty, even if they're in win now? Like, what are the scenarios around these tier 2 prospects?
Well, it's a comfort level thing for every Dynasty manager. I know that there are plenty of Dynasty people who are just kind of perpetually in win now mode, and maybe taking Jones or Holliday isn't their cup of tea. If you're in a league where you're really confident the league's going to exist in 5 years, 10 years, then I think you got to treat these guys like top 15 guys. If you're rebuilding and you know that you're 3 years away from contending whether the league exists or not, then I mean, I think these guys are pretty appealing. But if you're worried about the league folding, if your team is older and you've got to win in the short term, I wouldn't like. I think it's just a massive mistake if you have the first pick in a first year player draft or the second pick in a first year player draft to take Kodai Senga over these guys. I think that's just a huge mistake because you're passing on the opportunity to have a superstar hitter for his entire career. And if you take Jones and Holliday, even if you're the win now team, I think you can feel pretty good about being able to turn those guys into a better big league piece than Senga in sometime this season. So I think that's the way to go no matter where you're at competitively. But if it's just a dynasty and we're not talking first year player, like if you want to take a Curtis Mead or Anthony Volpe over those guys because you love the proximity, be my guest. I think those guys are all kind of in the same tier, but from just an upside superstar potential standpoint, I think Jones and Holliday have to be taken very seriously.
Like one that like an example that jumps out to me would be someone being like, well, I want Casas over Druw Jones, or Casas over Jackson Holliday because I'm going to get the production now and I think he's going to be really good, and that would kind of be it. You brought up I'm going to call them the 13th floor, like a hotel where they'll go from like 12 to 14. They're kind of my 13th floor because they're not really first year player guys, and some people won't put them in their first year player draft. So we actually did not have them I'm in the CBS Scott White 24 team league. They do not put them in the first year player because of international contracts, but some people do. So my 13th floor players of Kodai Senga and Masataka Yoshida, when they fall into this, they're the ones that screw it up. Seiya Suzuki screwed it up. We always have like an international guy that comes in and it is the ultimate huge young upside talent versus international gonna play right now production, and that's what people battle with. So you would say that Senga and obviously Yoshida, who completely broke all the projection systems, those players should not go over the 2 young guys, really, regardless of whatever format you're doing for your dynasty.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking dynasty, we're talking about a league that's got spots for minor leaguers, and these are 2 of the best minor leaguers out there. And just because Senga and Yoshida are older and had success in Japan doesn't mean that they're super safe in terms of being top 150 players. They're fairly safe in that they're going to be playing in the major leagues, but we don't have any guarantee how good they're going to be. And I don't think there's really any case to say that they have anywhere near the type of ceiling that Jones and Holliday have.
Also, Sanga, I kind of struggled in that. What did he have a start? I guess it was 2 days ago. He was showing off the Ghost Fork, which I think got Jordan Walker. If I'm reading this right, too, it had 41 inches of drop, which is relatively absurd. He threw 10 sweepers with an almost 2,900 RPM, and he maxed out on the fastball at 99. This is Sanga, but there were some early control struggle issues. If you're in a startup dynasty and you want to win now, the same, I mean, I know you've kind of answered it. I'm just trying to build different scenarios. Is there that scenario where you're in a dynasty startup where like everyone's together? You know what I mean? It's not like a separate prospect draft. You got to do them all together. Senga or Jackson Holliday and win now. And it's still Holliday?
Yeah, still Holliday. And
Okay.
I was there for that Senga start a couple days ago. And
oh, you were in Florida for first pitch, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Baby.
And I got to watch his bullpen session before the game. This was one of those fields where the bullpen is on the field. It's not behind any walls or anything. And so you had like 200, 300 Mets fans just crowding these railings about like 40, 50 feet away from Senga during this bullpen session. And dude, he could not throw a strike at all in this bullpen session. I thought that the control was going to be an issue in the start, and he did walk the first two guys. Then, props to him. He kind of started throwing the filth. Guys weren't laying off of it the way they probably should have. I mean, I think if I were Arenado, Goldie, Jordan Walker, I would have been make him throw a strike mode. And I think just from what I saw, I think the control could be an issue. There could be some ugly outings. Hopefully that was just nerves because of how, that was his first stateside game action. There were a lot of Mets fans there. Maybe it was just some nerves, but I didn't leave that start feeling like, oh crap, I got to get this guy. Obviously the stuff was great, but I mean, it was kind of odd to just see him just be completely unable to throw a strike in a bullpen session without hitters in the box.
Well, that's another first-year player draft pitcher that I'm all too familiar with that fails to even in practice sessions throw strikes on fastballs. That's a problem. What were your any takes on that fork, on the Ghost Fork that you saw in person?
Well, I wasn't right behind the plate like where the scouts are, so I mean, I think anyone could have a similar take by just watching video as I would. I mean, it was great. You mentioned all the metrics and everything. It's not an issue with the stuff at all. Obviously, if you're touching 99 and you got that type of movement on the off-speed pitches, you could miss a lot of bats. It's just going to be all about the control for me.
Yeah, I'm watching a video too that it has me thinking, like my initial reaction, and I think I might have said this before, with a guy that the dominant pitch, and you could call it arguably dominant pitch, but if I have a guy that struggles with high velocity fastballs with command and has like this dominant breaking pitch, I go back and think of dominant Casey Mize when he was coming up and everyone was talking about the splitter. And my big thing was like, well, just don't swing at the splitter. And you saw in his first couple starts where guys were just not swinging at the splitter at all and were forcing him to throw strikes with the fastball and they were beating him up. So your ability to throw strikes in different spots is really important. But I'm watching this video of Pitching Ninja right now, and the release point is really interesting because he overlaid the 98-mile-an-hour fastball and this 83-mile-an-hour fork. And I could definitely see they're going to have to figure out like the different release points or the quick movement off the hand to decipher those to not be swinging at them. But to what you said, like it might simply just be you don't swing early in counts and you make him throw strikes. You just make him throw strikes early on. Hilariously, like this whole Miguel Vargas situation where everyone knows he's coming up and he's not swinging and yet he still has walks and guys can't get it over. That might be an approach to have with Senga, but I mean, to your point, like you didn't walk away super impressed with him. So the floor 13 players, they've got their spot. Masataka Yoshida, I think, is interesting. But if I'm in a first-year player personally, I don't consider Yoshida until probably at least the 8th or 9th guy, even if I'm in win now. And Senga's tough. If I were in a dynasty and it was first-year player and I had like the 4th or 5th pick, I personally couldn't pass up the big four. I consider the big four. We're going to talk about tier 2 here in a second. When you get to 5 and you start looking at guys like Cam Collier and Neto and Brooks Lee, like I might be willing to take that risk with Sanga, regardless of some of those early issues, because that 3-pitch mix that you just bring up, even with command issues, it's something you might want to bet on. A 99-mile-an-hour fastball, big sweeper that's getting whiffs, and a ghost fork, which is going to keep guys on their toes the whole time. Those are things that I feel like pitchers and pitching coaches could work with. It's just, how much involvement do the Mets pitching coaches really even need when you have Verlander and Scherzer out there? Like, what do they get taught? So you hope the pitchers might move off a little bit on them. The tier 2 in first year player, I put 5 different players in here, even if I don't necessarily agree with it. Elijah Green, Tamar Johnson, Brooks Lee, Zach Neto, Cam Collier. I believe that is tier 2. When you're looking at all these players, it mixes in different. How do you rank out these 5? I don't remember what your order is.
Termar is definitely number 3. Elijah Green is 4. But Elijah Green could move up and he could move down. I think he's a very volatile prospect, even this year, even at his age. The strikeout rate, it could be scary, it could be manageable, and if it's scary, I'll slide him down. But I think that the upside justifies him being at 4 behind Johnson.
I almost put those 2 alone, by the way, because I personally believe they're kind of in their own sector. Like, I love Tamar Johnson, and I think people are kind of coming back around on it. Elijah Green might be the most physically gifted player in this entire draft, but he's got big strikeout issues. So you could almost argue that this is like tier 2A, and then it's tier 2B on this, because I know you and I don't disagree, but I feel like there's some people out there that you start to look at these high school guys, both that have a couple warts on them, if you will, and they go, well, I would rather Brooks Lee, who's got tremendous power, a great bat, and might move to a corner spot. Zach Neto, who just hit a big double the other day, looks a little overmatched, but he's always got an interesting approach, who I really love. And then, in first year player, you get around the prospect fantasy people, and Cam Collier goes up as high as 3 for some, because he's a next world athlete who actually reclassified to join the draft class in here. So that's why I kind of ended them out together. So it's Tamar, Elijah Green, and then what's that separation with those other 3?
Yeah, there's a gap there for me too. I think Zach Neto and Brooks Lee are definitely the top 2 college guys. I prefer Neto. Just think he's more likely to contribute in all 5 categories, whereas I don't think Lee's going to run at all. And then Collier, again, it's just kind of roster context, league context, probably 5 years away, 4 years away. If that's just a deal breaker for you, then so be it. Neto and even Lee could debut this year. So I think I would still suggest kind of going after one of them over Senga, even if you're in win now mode, just because they're going to be 4 or 5 months behind Senga, and they've got much more staying power in my opinion. But yeah, I mean, I'm with you in terms of I would want Johnson or Green, or I'd want to be picking maybe like 7th and just get whichever guy kind of falls.
Like, I just want to not be around Senga and Yoshida. I don't even want to have to think about it, is bottom line what I would want. What when you're putting those 2 guys for the major league spot, what odds would you put on Lee and Neto to make a debut this year if you had to give odds?
I think Neto makes it if he's healthy. I just think you look at that depth chart, and you look at the Angels, the way that they draft guys specifically to move them quickly. They don't that's the appeal to them.
That they don't have to really work with, and they don't have to try to mature and develop because their development isn't great.
Yeah. And I mean, they did that with pitchers last year. Neto, I mean, is he a better option at big league shortstop than Luis Rengifo come August? I don't know. He could be. And so I would give Neto above 50% chance of debuting this year, as long as he doesn't suffer an injury. Lee, there's Carlos Correa. Every time he gives a quote, it's just kind of take it with a grain of salt. But he thinks Lee's ready for the big leagues this year. I don't see any really obvious path for him. That's a crowded depth chart. They've got plenty of guys who've been paying their dues in the upper levels who are infielders. So I would say definitely under 50% on Lee, but he was such an advanced college hitter that I wouldn't rule it out.
And I think he is probably the best just bat in general. If you're trying to, make that guess, is Lee. But I've been a Neto guy. My only concern with Neto is I went back to watch replays because I tweeted out this video, that Neto double video. And the thing that jumped out to me, and I completely forgot about this because one of the things I liked about it was he had this really mild approach on, it was a 2-strike count. And I just had forgot that his version of choking up on the bat is on 2-strike count. So in the first 2 counts, any non 2-strike count, he's got this really, really big front leg kick. I think it's reminiscent of Royce Lewis, and that's kind of why I've comped him to Royce Lewis. He just gets, that knee probably gets up, to middle of his rib cage. It just really gets up there. But then in 2-strike counts, the leg barely moves, and that was where he stuck into that double. My problem with him is, boy, did he look overmatched. And I know it was one of the first, or maybe it was the first spring training at bats he's getting, and you're going up against more major league pitching, but they just brutalized him with the fastballs when he was implementing that front leg kick, and his timing seemed off. And then when he got into simplified, I want to make contact mode, crushes the double to right center field, and he flew. I think actually turned it into a triple. He's a super fast, athletic guy. My only worry with Neto is that he is going to have some early struggles. He's going to run into early contact struggles that the team is going to be a little bit worried about, and they're going to have to develop him longer, that they're not going to take guys like David Fletcher and Rengifo off of the team in favor of him. So that's my worry about Neto for this year. Brooks Lee is interesting because you could look at the depth chart and be like, oh, there's not a path right now because they do have a lot of guys. And if he goes to third, if Kirilloff could go to DH, Miranda could go to first, Brooks Lee could be in at third with the potential to play shortstop once Royce Lewis is there if they need the depth. But I would probably put both. I put Neto at 35% and Brooks Lee at 30%, which I would love. But it's part of the case of what makes them so interesting when you're drafting these guys. You have, let me do a couple differences. Tamar Johnson is 4 spots higher than Oswalt Peraza, who's making time this year. What do you like about Tamar over Oswalt Peraza if you were trying to break it down to someone who is just freaking out because they need production now? Why Tamar over Oswalt Peraza?
Well, if someone's freaking out and they want production now, I have no problem going Peraza over Johnson. I think Johnson's just got more impact potential offensively, and I think he's going to move pretty quick for a high school hitter. But I mean, they're in the same tier, so I would not spend any time trying to talk anyone out of Peraza over Johnson if they're trying to win now.
Okay, yeah, I mean, Peraza's got a better stealing potential, but I think the contact is going to be better than Tamar Johnson. Let's try one with Elijah Green. Let's see. You've got Elijah Green. Okay, Elijah Green versus Colton Cowser. You got Colton Cowser one spot. And I'm really picking at you here because these guys are next to each other. And at the end of the day, I know personally I can speak for James because I am the same way. You want to pick one guy over the other. One guy being 22 and one guy being 23 isn't the biggest thing in the world. But what is a separator for Colton Cowser to be above Green when you have big questions on Green?
So yeah, I mean, I would just say that Cowser is much, 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 much safer than Green. Green has 40 homer potential realistically. Cowser probably doesn't have 30 homer potential realistically. So there's definitely a gap in terms of the tools in certain facets of the game with them. But Green could just not even amount to anything. And Cowser is going to probably debut this year. So just the safety factor with Cowser, and it's not like he's got a low ceiling. I mean, he could be a 20-20 guy. So
mashed a homer in spring just the other day. That's 7 players. Of those 7, how many are top 50 prospects in the first year of these first year player guys? In your mind?
Let's see. So
we know Druw, Holliday, Elijah, Tamar are.
Right. And then Neto is, Collier is like, Collier and Neto are just inside my top 50, but that's it.
And then Brooks Lee's right outside of it.
What is he? Not right outside. He's kind of around like 70.
Okay, so he's a little bit further. Okay, so 6 of the guys we talked about, the first 2 tiers, are in James's top 50 of overall prospects. Takes us to tier 3. This isn't in a specific order I put these guys in, or my order or anything like that, but you have Spencer Jones with the New York Yankees, very, very popular right now. A lot of Aaron Judge comps that are being thrown around. Kevin Parada, who I think is a lot less popular with people. I'm a little bit higher on him with the New York Mets catcher. Druw Gilbert with the Houston Astros, and Chase DeLauder, who's going to miss some significant time suffering, I think it was a foot injury, but he's going to be out for a bit. Druw Gilbert's in there. And if you wanted to argue, let's just do it. Let's put Gavin Cross in there. Gavin Cross had a day. I had him in tier 4, but let's go Spencer Jones, Kevin Parada, Gilbert, DeLauder, and Gavin Cross. 2 favorites out of tier 3 if you had to pick.
Okay, so I'll say Druw Gilbert, very well-rounded. He was the highest, or he was the guy I was highest on of all these guys before the draft, and he went to a good landing spot. So I think Gilbert's got to be there. And then Kevin Parada, I guess, would be my other one.
Really? Okay.
Really strong track record. He's just been extremely productive for the last 3 years. I have no idea if he's going to be a catcher or a DH or split time at multiple spots, but they drafted the bat with him, and I have faith in the bat. So I'll go with Gilbert and Parada.
I'm surprised in a great way, because I did not realize that. I do these, for everybody listening, I do these things called the P180P Mocks. I create an ADP system for prospects. I do it on my Patreon at endlessleague.com. So you can see what top 200 prospects are, because we don't have an ADP out there. We got some other industry people that do different drafts. And I felt like in everything that I've seen over the last 4 months, Kevin Parada is such an afterthought. Yet, like you said, he had such a prestigious career in college at Georgia Tech. I mean, he hit like 27 homers, I think, can steal some bases, makes contact at every stage of his college career. And then he comes over to the Mets, and I really think they want him to be the catcher. Like Francisco Alvarez, I think they see as like pseudo catcher, almost like Varsho was, like pseudo catcher, but more of a DH than outfield, where Parada's, I think, someone that they could line up to that. And I think Kevin Parada could be something like a J2 Realmuto long term. I think he's just, and I know we've had some guys like Henry Davis is really cool coming out of Louisville, but I think Kevin Parada is offensively and defensively just maybe one of the most solid guys. But I feel like he's like 12, 13, 14 on so many lists. You actually have him next to Brooks Lee, and that's pleasantly surprising, James.
Yeah, I think it's just people maybe overreacting to exit velocity data in both directions, overreacting to how good someone like Spencer Jones's exit velocity data is, and kind of overreacting to sort of how underwhelming Parada's was in a short sample. But I think you gotta look at the track record there. Jones was a guy that was like kind of interesting before the draft, but not a guy that I would have had anywhere near Parada. And he goes to the Yankees, and people start making all these stupid comps, and they see the EVs and stuff. But I think you got to look at the track record there.
Yeah, and if people are wondering, you've got him over like Diego Cartaya, Henry Davis. I mean, it's a pretty good group that you're putting him in here. Oh, of those guys, is there someone that doesn't belong? Gavin Cross, Spencer Jones, who's the other one? Chase DeLauder. Do one of those guys not belong in this tier?
I don't have Cross in this tier personally.
And I had him in the next tier, by the way. So I don't know why I decided to throw him in, because I think he had a homer the other day, or he got some action in spring.
You will see him go first round. So I think just from where are these guys going to go, I think he might belong in the tier, but I think he's the worst of those guys.
Okay. No, why do you think he's the worst? Why did you hate Gavin Cross?
I wasn't that high on him before the draft. I just have questions about the hit tool. He hasn't faced age appropriate pitching yet. I'll be interested to see what Gavin Cross does at AA. I'll be interested to see what Spencer Jones does at AA. I don't know. It's a bad org.
Bad org.
I just think there's going to be more swing and miss there than people are letting on, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, development, like, look at Eric. I love Eric Pena personally, but like the regression he took of the, like, I don't know what it was. Was it the lack of working with? He showed such promise for like early stages, but from what they've done of really developing guys like Michael Garcia is kind of an anomaly at this point for how they're really bringing up players. It's funny you say it, because I was at Royals camp 2 days ago and I saw it was Gavin Cross, Hayden Dunhurst, and Caden Wallace were the guys that went out. And there was something kind of about Caden Wallace that I wonder if, and not to like make a big thing about it, but I wonder if Caden Wallace could end up being a better fantasy option at a first year player than Cross was. And Caden Wallace hit 293 in his pro debut, 2 homers, stole 8 bases, got up to single A. He moved 2 levels. I think he did. Yeah, he did a little bit of ACL, and he hit 294 in A-ball. I kind of like, and I think he was at Arkansas. I really liked him early on, and he just kind of faded off. That, like, when I look at Gavin Cross, I think, oh, that's kind of a pass for me, and I would want to take Caden Wallace a little bit later. Just a random Caden Wallace aside. I don't know if you have any feelings on him.
No, that wouldn't surprise me, and it's very clear that they view him as their third baseman of the future. No one's standing in his way, so yeah, I can see that.
Yeah. Yep. And I think I might have even seen him play a little first yesterday, but he was locked in at third. They were running a scrimmage game on the backfields, and a lot of talent that was running out there. Okay, so let's go to tier 4, and then we are going to look at some deeper. And then there's an obvious omission we have here that I'm going to clearly cover. This is tier 4 in the first year player, which is essentially getting us into like the heavy first round of first year player and trying to give you guys an idea. And tier 4 consists of Dalton Rushing, who is from Louisville, and catcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Very exciting. Jett Williams, who's going to clearly be the first person we talk about because James really likes him. Jacob Berry is one of those players, kind of like Kevin Parada, that has really fallen off. This is former U of A first baseman who went over to LSU. He hits, but kind of defensively has some weird questions. And then Ethan Salas I'm throwing in here because of some crazy stuff that is out there. And I feel good about that because I think I felt like I started the talk about Ethan Salas when everyone was talking about Felton and Selston. So, but aside, let's talk about Jett Williams, because as much as I brought up, my excitement about where you have Kevin Parada, you have Jett Williams above Brooks Lee and Kevin Parada. That is very telling. You and I have kind of gone back and forth about him. He's a physically smaller guy, around 5'8", but kind of stocked out a little bit, has incredible bat speed, can really turn on the ball. Hit tool is pretty high. But why don't you expand on your true love of Jett Williams?
Yeah, I think he's just got a really, really high fantasy ceiling. Guys who are a little undersized, I think it pretty much always opens up a buying opportunity, for teams in the draft, opens up an opportunity for us in Dynasty, because there's just this bias against guys like this. And I understand it to a certain extent, but we've just got probably a dozen examples over the past 5-10 years of guys who are undersized emerging as big-time impact fantasy hitters. And Jett Williams has all the physical traits that could allow him to do that. You mentioned the bat speed. He's also got big-time wheels on the bases, one of the best hitters from the prep ranks in that entire class. So I don't really care if a guy's 5'8", 5'9". If I love everything else in their game, I think we've had enough examples to kind of show us that you can be a superstar in the big leagues without being 5'11", 6 foot. So if the only reason you don't like Jett Williams is his height, then that's fine. But just acknowledge the rest of his profile is extremely exciting for fantasy.
It kind of reminds me of, and this is a negative, but it kind of reminds me of like when Nick Gonzalez came up, because Nick, I think they listed him at 5'10". I don't know. When I saw him at New Mexico State, like it was like 5'9" or something. He's a smaller guy, but you could see where the physical bulk was going to come in. Nick Gonzalez had some of the best bat speed I have ever seen in the college side. It was tremendous. And Obviously, like he didn't take all of that, but the funny thing is like Jett Williams is a better hitter and he steals more. He was a perfect 6 for 6 in 10 games in the minor leagues this past year. So I mean, obviously the attempts are going to be a little bit up, but he was really able to go. So I know Jett is definitely your guy. Ethan Salas, I want to talk about. So I planted my flag earlier in the year on Prospect One, especially right around the J15 time. J15 is when the international players are allowed to sign. And Feldman Selston with the Seattle Mariners was one of the most popular guys. And I did an episode on first year player. And one of the conversations we would have around that is that the international class doesn't have as much flair anymore. They go way later. There's multiple years now, a track record of this hasn't worked. Robert Poisson is like right in our face. Well, Ethan Salas was a player that I just was like, this is my guy. I don't care. He's a catcher. And then we get this article that came out recently. It was a little absurd. It was like Ethan Salas, Hall of Famer and blah, 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 blah. But he is a 16-year-old, James, that is in camp. I saw him today. I was over there. He's working on the side. And the talk from his side, which I heard before it became public in this article, was that he might play low A ball this year, not just rookie. He might go to full season ball as a 16-year-old. It's absolutely unheard of. So I had him higher than anyone in the world. I believe that's starting to change a little bit because of the buzz that's going on. I can't now get him in a few drafts I've done. I'm very curious at your Ethan Salas conversation. He might not be in this tier 4 for you at all, but I do think he has moved into this tier 4, tier 5 of first year player, that he's become more of a priority for people because he might be the next big international thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of comes down to kind of what we were talking about earlier. It's just like, how long is your league going to exist? How do you treat catching prospects? I think about a guy like Harry Ford. Harry Ford hasn't done anything but positive things since getting into pro ball. He's had success in every aspect of the game, but he's still 2+ years away. There's, I don't know, a dozen catching prospects in my top 100, 10 catching prospects in my top 100. Most people in Dynasty either have a good big league catcher or a really good catching prospect. So at a certain point, there's kind of a supply and demand issue at that position. And if you're talking about a guy who's at least 3 years away in Salas, then it's not something I'm really chasing just because of the position. Nothing against him, nothing against his upside or his talents, but there's just, even last year we had probably half dozen catchers emerge from being not top 150 prospects to being top 100 prospects. And it's just, how many teams in a Dynasty League don't have a catcher they really like, and if you have two or three catchers, what can you even get for them in a trade?
We've kind of done this, like you and I have done this last 2 years. It's like the catcher renaissance is going on in fantasy. There's just like so many better catchers and they're getting used in different positions. Like, MJ Melendez playing outfield and stuff like that. Francisco Alvarez is going to be a utility or DH type of guy. But at the end of the day, like there's only so much you can keep going. I don't disagree with that. Even this year's class, I mean, we just talked about Kevin Parada. Dalton Rushing is another one of those who had maybe one of the best spurts coming out of the draft in short minor league stints than anybody else. There's only so much you can do, but I would say like the control, the pitch recognition from Ethan Salas at his age is already ridiculous. It's not absurd for 19-year-olds to make even the majors. And I think that is on the table. That is literally what they're talking about as far as games that he can call defensively, how he is as a catcher. We'll just have to see how he matures. He's someone I want to invest in. The problem is I also want to invest in Dalton Rushing. That's another one of those. He has just jumped up boards from like November, if you were doing first year player, to now here in March. He's also a guy that's a little bit more tantalizing in like first year play or dynasty draft. I'm sorry, not just first year player, but like dynasty drafts. If you're doing a fresh new dynasty, Dalton Rushing, you would want to take over an Ethan Salas because that guy might hit AAA this year, especially with how the bat is. So I'm curious at your Dalton Rushing takes.
Yeah, I think he kind of belongs. Like I think I've got him and Spencer Jones back to back. I think he belongs right in that mix. I think I could go back and forth on Parada versus Rushing. And part of what I like, you don't want to overreact to a small sample, but he did have the best debut of anyone.
Easy.
But whether you want to look at just basic stats, whether you want to look at hard hit stats, and then you look at his kind of background and the fact that he was Henry Davis's backup for a couple of years, it's, you can sort of see how this might be a guy who's really starting to peak now that he's getting the reps that his talent deserves, and obviously in a great organization for development. And so when you're taking Dalton Rushing, I think you just got to view same way as like Parada. I think you're just evaluating the bat, and if he's as good of a hitter as he sort of teased us with last year, he could play first base, he could play DH. I don't think they'll have a problem finding a spot for him.
Natural transition for catchers too. We see going to third base. That would be something. Not saying he can, but we've seen that transition happen a lot of guys going over there. There is an obvious thing that we haven't mentioned whatsoever. Where are the pitchers? Good question. Where are the pitchers? Because they're not in the first round, a first-year player. That, and not saying it's not a talented group, but it's not as talented as in some previous years. Here's some names to chew on of where these pitchers are. Cooper Ajerpe, Cade Horton, Dylan Lesko, Brock Porter. You've got Jacob Mizorowski, Landon Sims, and Kumar Rocker. Let's talk about two that you really like out of this group. And do you agree that there's none in a 15 team that really belong in that space? You can obviously pick the top two. There's a couple high school arms, Brock Porter and Dylan Lesko. Dylan Lesko might be like the number one pitcher if there wasn't some injury in high school stuff out there. Landon Sims struggled with having Tommy John surgery, and he hasn't really pitched. Cade Horton kind of came on really late. There's a lot of pitchers in here. Is there a pitcher that belongs in the top 15? And give me two that you want to break down.
Well, Cooper Ajerpe is my top guy, and I have taken him top 15 in one first-year player draft, but there's some context. Like I really needed pitching in this league, and I had enough offensive depth where it's just like it was way more worth it for me to roll the dice on Ajerpe than to take a Dalton Rushing or a Drew Gilbert in this specific league. So I think if you're just desperate for a pitcher, maybe if you're in a points league or something like that, I think it's fine to take Ajerpe in the first round. So Ajerpe's obviously one of my guys there. And then I'll say Cade Horton for the second one. He slips in some first year player drafts. I think that's a mistake. He's got the stuff. It's kind of, can he handle a starter's workload? That's the TBD part. But if he shows us that he can, if he's going 5 innings a start sort of middle of the summer and really building up those innings, I think you'll see him really shoot up lists because the stuff is there to be kind of a front line or number 2 starter.
I was trying to look here in so Scott, our friend Scott White runs a league. Let me see where I did it. And yeah, I got Cade Horton in the second round, and it's 24 teams. And I got him in the second round at pick 14. So, what is that? 38th pick. I was able to get Horton. And this is a points league, by the way. So I agree. These guys fall. And those are two that I really like. Landon Sims is someone I want to take really late. And then the guy that, stands out here is Kumar Rocker. And I would just add, James, you've been on the not impressed train for a long time. I definitely tried to give benefit of the doubt that it could fix, and it's just not happening. Like I was at I shared that video of Jack Leiter throwing the other day, and Kumar Rocker was there, and just during this little simple throwing session, just fastballs all over the place. It still cannot be commanded, and until he maybe pulls a Hunter Green and finds comfort at any part of the count throwing that slider, which he needs to do, and finding some semblance of command, I just don't see him as a starter. I really think he's going to go into relief, and I'm out. And I wasn't out before, and that was wrong that I'm out on Kumar Rocker because there's no fastball command whatsoever. He has become a 2-pitch pitcher, and one of them doesn't even work. So it's not worth it. Even though you're going to be like, oh my God, Kumar Rocker and the name value. Do I really take Landon Sims, or do I really take his teammate who went in the third round, Brock Porter, over him? I think at this point you do. And I think you agree with me.
Yeah. I'm just happy for Kumar that he got his signing bonus, and I hope things turn around for him, but if I had Kumar Rocker in a Dynasty League, I would just be crossing my fingers that he could be their closer in a couple of years.
Yeah, I think that's what you're playing for. Last up, just some deep names here. We obviously focused, 10 to 20 players, first to second round here. We got only a couple minutes. Yeah, you gave out your top 5 sleeper names. Xavier Isaac, Tampa Bay first baseman. Brandon Barrera with the Toronto Blue Jays, really good pitcher. Connor Prelip with the Twins. Judd Fabian with the Orioles. And Ben Joyce, very interesting one. Ben Joyce, famously at Tennessee, was a kid that threw like 104 miles per hour. He's a reliever. Could be a closer. Could be up with the Angels sooner rather than later. You want a quick little snippet on one or two, or even all of these guys? These were your big top 5 deeper names in first year player.
Yeah, I mean, Isaac and Barriera, prep guys, upside plays, they're kind of boomer bust. Isaac, I think, is just going to be an exit velocity king, and that alone could push him up rankings, but I think there's big time upside with those two. Prelip, I don't even value Prelip that much lower than like Cade Horton or Cooper Jerpy. I think he's the third best college pitcher from the class. I think the Twins got a steal there.
He just had Tommy John, I think. I think that ended the year, correct?
He had it at Alabama, but he's throwing he's been throwing since the fall, I believe.
It was like early in last college season, so that's probably why he's back doing it.
Yeah, so I think sometimes we see this with the Jesus Luzardos, Walker Buehler types. They come back from TJ and then they just rocket up lists because people remember how good the stuff was. Judd Fabian was a guy that I'd been out on for a while. Obviously, he's been on the draft radar for years. But the Orioles get their hands on him, and all of a sudden he's making really good swing decisions in a brief sample in pro ball. So I think there might be something there. Big-time tools. And then, Ben Joyce, if you don't want to take a relief pitching prospect, I understand. But if you're hunting for a closer, if you're hunting for a potential closer with upside, hard to overlook Joyce. I mean, the stuff obviously is well documented, clear path to saves in that bullpen, and even the stuff just from big league camp this year, they've been saying like they haven't been like, we're not carrying Joyce this year. They probably won't, but I think we could see Joyce this year, and I think you could even get saves this year.
That's right. How much have you been loving seeing all the prospect love in spring training, by the way? Jordan Walker rocking, Corbin Carroll going, any just spring prospect things that come to mind? There's been a whole lot of production we've had. This hasn't to do with first year player, by the way, but just curious on any of the spring training prospects that have got you going.
I'm just really annoyed at how I can't seem to get Brandon Pfaadt in any drafts. I love him. I want to be the high man on Brandon Pfaadt. I want him on all my teams, and everyone else is doing the same thing.
You know, it's funny. I think I did I don't remember what it was. It was like in November, October. I don't remember if it was Prospect One or CBS. I did a show and I talked about him, and you immediately hit me up after, and you're like, I love the Brandon Pfaadt call, because you were back then, like, I think you were almost like quietly sitting there, like, you're like, I'm going to be the Brandon Pfaadt guy. And then I've been talking about him. You've been talking about him. I got hit up today by a friend of ours in the industry that was like, is he going to make the roster? And I was like, no guarantees, but he's for sure not guaranteed to go to AAA. I think that's what some people think. Like, no matter what he does, there's no way. And I'm like, no, that's not the case with him. Like, I think the Diamondbacks are open to it. And I think the differentiating thing with Pfaadt is the innings he put up last year. There's no excuse. Like, he put up like 160 innings. There's no excuse for him to have to go to the minors over Ryan Nelson or Trey Jameson for one of those reasons. It's got to come down to performance, or it'll come down to like, old school manager, like, well, Ryan Nelson had the gig and we're going to give him a shot. Like, it could be that type of thing. But Brandon Pfaadt has been he's probably been the second best pitcher in all of Diamondbacks camp. And that's why he continuously moves up. If the Diamondbacks were to name him, rocket ship, right?
Yeah, well, 100% there, but I actually wouldn't even hate it. Like, if they say, okay, Pfaadt's going to start the year at AAA, I wouldn't even mind that, because then I'd be able to get a bunch.
Because then the cost would come down.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be, if he goes to AAA, he's going to be there for weeks, not months. And it might only be a couple weeks, might only be 3 weeks. And Zach Davies is not standing in his way. Davies is just there as like org depth. And like you said, Pfaadt, what is he? Probably their third best starting pitcher in camp, conservatively. So
yeah, conservatively, he has been phenomenal. I got to see him the other day. I totally agree with that. Okay, that's a good takeaway. What do you got going on, RotoWire, for people to check out? What do you want to plug?
Wrote about my AL labor auction from the weekend, and then I've got volume 2.0 of my rookie hitter tiers and rookie pitcher tiers coming up. We'll be talking about like Jordan Walker in those. We'll be talking about other guys who've been kind of improving their redraft stock this spring.
Awesome. Well, guys, I know there was no Eno and no DVR. I know it can be very, very jarring, and it can make you appreciate even more what you have in DVR and Eno. But I do hope that you found some enjoyment out of it. I hopefully hope it was helpful, especially if you guys have first-year player coming up. You may have already had it, but maybe this will give you some perspective for values. If you have them coming up, hopefully this puts you in a good spot. You can go and check out James's ranks over at RotoWire. You can subscribe. You can check mine as well. I've got first year player and top 500 just updated in the last 24 hours over at endlessleague.com. But hopefully it was an easy transition to an episode like this where I don't even know when the last time you didn't have both of those guys, but Eno is enjoying a little bit of time. That is going to do it here at Rates and Barrels. If you guys want, go and check out theathletic.com/rates and barrels to subscribe, get the draft kit, help you the ultimate stuff. I've got some stuff in there. Everybody wrote a few little things, and there's a whole bunch of stuff in there. You can get the pitching plus projections, my dynasty ranks, and all of the fantastic articles. It's something I forget sometimes. I go to an article, I'm like, oh, this looks like a great article. It's The Athletic, and I can easily click on because I have my subscription because I'm working here right now, so it helps out. But that's going to do it for the episode. You can find James on Twitter at RealJRAnderson. You can find me on Twitter at IsItTheWelsh. We will be back later in the week. It's Al, it's Eno, and I'm actually going to be back here on Friday with Eno as well, so a little bit more of me. Thank you guys for hanging out right here on Rates and Barrels. Bye, friends.